Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you're captivated by the intricate, deeply layered, and honestly often devastating world of Westeros, you already know that the Targaryen Civil War is overwhelmingly bleak. But I want to explain exactly why it reaches such catastrophic, almost suffocating levels. Because when we strip this narrative down to its absolute core, we're really looking at a profoundly tragic story. It's about deeply flawed people who have been handed entirely too much power, and they're completely unable to escape their own petty human vindictiveness. I mean, we've seen this throughout human history, right? Ambitious second sons desperate to carve out a lasting legacy, fighting over plots of land. But this conflict, it's entirely different. This war is magnified catastrophically by one single, terrifying variable, and that is dragons. The second you hand a power-hungry, emotionally unstable royal their own massive, fire-breathing weapon of mass destruction, the rules of engagement change instantly. The bleakness we're going to break down today isn't just about political backstabbing, it's about a living, breathing world quite literally tearing itself apart at the seams.
I want to jump directly into how this cosmic scale of destruction fundamentally changes everything we know about medieval warfare. Let's really picture Harrenhal for a second. It stands as the largest castle in the entire realm, right? It was meticulously built over generations as this monumental testament to human hubris by Harren the Black. But Aegon the Conqueror didn't lay a traditional siege to it. He just bypassed the walls completely and used dragonfire to quite literally melt the fortress from the top down. We have to really think about the sensory reality of that kind of destruction. We're talking about stone heating to such an extreme temperature that it glows, warps, and drips like candle wax over the screaming soldiers trapped inside. And today, those broken, twisted towers remain as a permanent, agonizing reminder of how the entire paradigm of war violently shifted. It brilliantly illustrates a terrifying truth that anchors this whole conflict. It absolutely does not matter how strong your defenses are. It doesn't matter how thick your stone walls are, how deep your moat is, or how vast your armies are. Dragons render all of it utterly, laughably useless. It's a devastating futility that just hangs like a thick fog over every single battle we're going to break down. And you know, when we analyze Alice Rivers at Harrenhal, we uncover something profound about how that futility connects to the very earth itself. Let's break down her presence here. She isn't just some simple ghost haunting a ruined castle for the sake of a spooky atmosphere. When she talks about Harrenhal as this breathing, pulsing entity, claiming its massive founding stones were watered with the blood of thousands of men and that the castle is always thirsty, she represents a terrifying elemental hunger. Remember the lore here. Harren the Black notoriously cleared out ancient sacred weirwood trees from the Riverlands to build his massive architectural monstrosity. Those ancient natural forces, rooted deep in the earth, are historically nourished by blood sacrifice. So this ties the narrative into something almost cosmic. It's a supernatural force quietly waiting in the background, and it is immeasurably older and much, much larger than whoever happens to sit on the Iron Throne.
So, let's move into Section 1, Criston Cole's Hollow Resolve.
That elemental, inescapable hunger radiating from the land itself? It ties perfectly into the terrifying and deeply futile journey we are witnessing unfold in the Riverlands. Let's follow Criston Cole step by step on his march. Cole is a character whose psychology is deeply fascinating right now, purely because it is so incredibly bleak. You see, unlike the highborn lords who are just playing at war, Cole actually earned his place through brutal martial merit, not by his last name. Yet the physical and emotional horrors of this war are completely breaking his rigid worldview. Just watch how this sequence unfolds out on the road. Cole and his exhausted men are trying to outmaneuver the elusive rivermen, relying on traditional marching formations. But they walk blindly into a devastatingly simple guerrilla trap. The rivermen have scattered crow's feet across the muddy road. These are small, vicious, four-pointed iron spikes, specifically designed so that one sharp point is always facing upward, ready to pierce and cripple the hooves of passing horses. So Cole's traditional cavalry forces are instantly neutralized in the mud. And in this deeply unsettling, quiet moment of defeat, Cole is forced to draw his own dagger and mercy kill his crippled horse. Let's really understand the weight of this moment. This isn't just some minor military setback. It is a stark, visceral signpost that Cole's pristine, honorable notion of warfare is dead, and his path is turning incredibly dark.
Right in the thick of this grim, suffocating mud and endless suffering, a sudden, jarring glimmer of hope actually appears. Gwaine Hightower turns to Cole with an earnest, deeply genuine offer of sanctuary. He tells the exhausted commander, "You could make a home in Old Town." Now we have to contrast the absolute squalor of their current reality with what Gwaine is actually offering here. The Hightowers are incredibly wealthy, heavily influential, and deeply connected to the pristine, scholarly citadel. Gawain is essentially offering Cole a golden ticket out of the grime, the blood, the ambushes, and the endless slaughter of the Riverlands. He's offering a quiet, wealthy, highly respectable life away from the creeping madness of dragon warfare. It is an incredibly tempting offer that literally any sane man in Cole's horrific, doomed position would not just consider, but immediately accept.
So we really have to ask ourselves, why? Why does Criston Cole, a man currently facing insurmountable, suffocating 200-to-1 odds against a relentless guerrilla force, completely and silently reject this total salvation? Well, the answer requires us to look back at the psychological trauma he just endured. When Gawain points out that continuing their march is quite literally a march to certain death, Cole barely reacts. His blank acceptance reveals his complete psychological collapse after surviving the absolute horrors of Rook's Rest. Surviving that specific battle, watching men literally burn to ash in a heartbeat while giant dragons tore each other out of the sky, it broke his fundamental sense of logic. He's been a loyal, rigid servant all his life. He's defined by this unyielding, black and white devotion that ultimately brought him nothing but immense pain and trauma. So, salvation, it just doesn't make sense to him anymore.
Let me explain his tragic, deeply twisted mindset in this exact moment. Cole outright refuses to return to King's Landing as a scorned or defeated failure. Over the years, he has convinced himself that he is the realm's greatest, most honorable warrior. So he makes a conscious choice to embrace a bleak, suicidal march toward what he perceives as a glorious, legendary death in battle. It is a completely hollow, artificial resolve. He desperately wants to die cleared of his sins, unbent by his enemies, and finally, for the very first time in his life, in no one's service but his own. Let's break down the sheer tragedy of this. He is knowingly marching his few remaining exhausted men into an absolute slaughter, fueled by the delusional, desperate certainty that bards will sing songs of his ultimate sacrifice and that Queen Alicent herself might sit in a quiet room one day and hear them. He is actively choosing a glorious suicide over a quiet defeat.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Chaos in the Councils.
So, while Cole marches his men to certain doom on the battlefield, let's step behind closed doors and meticulously break down how the supposed leadership is faring on the opposing side. Unfortunately, they are failing on almost every conceivable level. I notice a profound systemic irony here that we really need to unpack to understand this political dynamic. Before this catastrophic civil war, Westeros had experienced over 80 continuous years of absolute, unprecedented peace under King Viserys and his predecessor Jaehaerys. Because of this long, drawn-out summer, Rhaenyra's small council severely lacks battle-tested, hardened military minds. And with the legendary Corlys Velaryon absent from the table, the council is comically, almost pathetically ill-prepared to wage an actual bloody war. Instead of sharp, decisive strategy, we watch step by step as their meetings descend into exhausting, chaotic bickering. You have these untested lords sitting quietly in the corner, totally overwhelmed by the stakes, while others are just throwing baseless insults across the table. The tension just compounds exponentially without a single drop of real direction.
This paralyzing, bureaucratic chaos reaches an absolute boiling point when some terrifying intelligence reports arrive. The massive, ancient, fortress-sized dragon Vhagar has been spotted hunting far up in the northern part of the Riverlands. This single piece of information instantly throws the council into sheer panic. The looming, unspoken question in the room is, where is Vhagar going? Let's analyze the psychological clash this triggers between our two leads. Rhaenyra immediately falls into overthinking. She fears it's a highly calculated provocation, and she's trying to decipher the enemy's grand, overarching strategy to avoid falling into a trap. Daemon, on the other hand, just leans into his brutal, straightforward pragmatism. He coldly dismisses her fears, bluntly stating that massive dragons simply have to eat, and Vhagar is just hunting. This fundamental difference in philosophy forces Rhaenyra and Daemon into a bitter, very public clash over how to respond. It exposes the deep, rotting fractures in their alliance right in front of their wavering lords, exactly at the moment when they desperately need absolute unity.
Which brings us to Section 3, the High Tower's Shadow.
While Rhaenyra is heavily distracted by the terrifying specter of Vhagar wandering the Riverlands, a much more insidious, creeping threat is quietly taking root right under her nose in King's Landing. It is a shadowy threat masterminded from afar by Aemond Hightower. Let's linger on the gruesome tableau Daemon discovers here because it perfectly encapsulates Ormond's hidden hand. Daemon walks into the horrific aftermath of Ormond's coordination, murdered gold cloaks, including their fiercely loyal leader, posed violently at a dining table. And written on the cold stone barracks wall directly behind them, painted thick in their own blood, are the chilling words, "A feast of traitors."
We really need to understand that this isn't just a simple assassination. It is a gruesome, highly calculated display of psychological warfare. Aemond isn't fighting a traditional battle of swords here. He is deliberately striking sheer terror directly into the heart of the City Watch to completely undermine Daemon's perceived absolute authority.
Let's break down Aemond's character step by step, because he is arguably one of the most terrifying cerebral adversaries in this entire conflict. He operates entirely on the philosophy that a sharp, cunning mind can successfully outwit the brute, savage force of Targaryen dragons. We see this masterfully executed in a seemingly quiet, tension-filled moment when he is playing the intricate board game Sivos with young Daemon. The scene starts with this false sense of security, right? Aemond has just proudly shown off shiny new gold coins minted with Daemon's face, which is a brazen, wealthy sign of open rebellion. But pay close attention to the shift in atmosphere. When Daemon makes a clever winning move on the board, Aemond's demeanor just snaps. He violently grabs Daemon's hand midair and aggressively sweeps all the carefully placed pieces off the table. That single shocking action radiates a constraining, unrelenting dread. In that split second, you realize that every single moment spent in the presence of this highly calculating man holds the terrifying potential for sudden, unhinged violence.
Moving to Section 4, Aegon's brutal reality check.
Speaking of unrelenting dread and sudden violent shifts in fortune, let's leave the deadly politics of the capital and shift our focus entirely back to the muddy woods. Far from the throne room, Aegon Targaryen is facing a devastating emotional reckoning of his own. It is genuinely pathetic, yet incredibly compelling from a character study perspective, to observe Aegon's complete fall from grace. Let's contrast his past with his present for a moment. He was a golden, dragon-riding king. Now, he is deposed, violently stripped of his throne, his golden crown, and his beloved dragon, reduced to a limping, filthy man fleeing for his life through dense, unforgiving woods. Yet, despite this absolute ruin, he is stubbornly, delusionally demanding to return to the site of his catastrophic defeat. And why? Because of one single blinding motivation: he just wants to physically murder his brother Aemond. He is totally disconnected from his bleak reality, wandering blindly through the dirt with his clubfoot companion, completely and utterly lost.
We have to slow down and meticulously dissect this pivotal, devastating scene between Aegon and Rhaenyra Strong. Aegon begins to whine in the mud, basically throwing a pathetic tantrum about how he could have been a truly great historic king if he had only been given a fair chance by those around him. But watch how Larys handles this. Larys stays dead silent. He lets Aegon finish his delusional rant. And then, mercilessly and surgically, Larys dismantles Aegon's ego piece by piece. He outlines step by step how Aegon was historically handed every conceivable cosmic advantage a human being could possibly ask for. Wealth, power, a crown, and a dragon so breathtakingly beautiful they named him after the sun itself. And how did Aegon repay that? He lazily, selfishly squandered every single one of them. Larys leans in and tells him, straight to his ruined face, that not only was he a terrible king, he is fundamentally a terrible man. Larys surgically removes every single excuse Aegon has left to cling to, finally forcing this ultimate, humbling realization upon the broken king, pushing him to agree to flee Westeros entirely.
Meanwhile, drawing a brilliant thematic parallel back at Harrenhal, we see the flip side of this deep Targaryen vulnerability. Aemond, the very brother Aegon is currently wandering the woods trying to kill, is experiencing a severe psychological breakdown of his own. Our perception of Aemond drastically shifts here. We see the smug, terrifying, one-eyed warrior violently waking from screaming nightmares, huddled and sobbing alone in the dark. He is completely, fundamentally unraveled by the temporary absence of his colossal, ancient dragon Vhagar. Through his tears, he openly cries out that he is absolutely nothing without her. It is a stunning stripping away of all his carefully constructed arrogance, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, deeply scarred child who is desperately yearning for maternal comfort and validation. Let's break down the step-by-step psychological shift that happens next and how the dark magic of Harrenhal fundamentally changes him. He is comforted by Alice Rivers, who steps into that maternal void, gently wiping his tears and humming an ancient tune to him. Watch how this interaction rebuilds his shattered confidence, but twists it into something far, far darker. When a group of dangerous bounty hunters arrives at the castle, Aemond doesn't hide or cower. He strides out to intercept them in the open courtyard. And what follows isn't just an action scene, it's a deliberate, chilling ritual. He slaughters the men effortlessly right in front of the bleeding face of the ancient weirwood tree.
This acts as a brutal, visceral blood sacrifice. He is actively feeding the thirsty, cursed earth of Harrenhal, cementing his deadly presence there, and willingly intertwining his own violent fate with the dark, humming magic of the ruined castle.
And finally, Section 5, Escapes and Dead Ends. This overwhelming, creeping theme of desperation and claustrophobia finally brings us back to the women of the Red Keep, who are rapidly, terrifyingly running out of options in a vicious war they did not ask to fight. We really must deeply understand the absolute suffocating isolation Queen Alicent faces right now, and the horrific paradox of her maternal instincts. Grand Maester Orwyle secretly brings a harsh, dangerous medicinal brew called Moon Tea directly for her traumatized daughter, Rhaenyra. Let's break down the suffocating political reality that forces this moment. The brutal logic here is absolutely undeniable. If Rhaenyra, who is already deeply unwell, gives birth to a male heir, that innocent child will instantly become a prime, high-value target for Rhaenyra's eventual fiery wrath. Alicent knows this in her bones. She tries to force this unspeakable, harsh reality onto her daughter just to save her. It's a gut-wrenching realization of a mother trying to protect her child by inflicting trauma, highlighting exactly how trapped and powerless they truly are in the sprawling game.
We have to really feel the suspense of Alicent's panicked, desperate escape plan here. Think about it. She is the former queen of the entire realm, a woman who once commanded armies with a single word, yet look at her now. First, she is reduced to begging, forced to trade away her most treasured, sacred seven-pointed star necklace to a lowly maid just to secure a moment's help. Then there's the sheer tension of the disguise. She and Rhaenyra wrap themselves in the drab wool of common servants, representing this massive, humiliating fall from grace, as they attempt to quietly slip away into the shadows of the night. But all of this agonizing effort leads to a crushing defeat, because finally, they only make it as far as the heavy wooden door before their hopes are entirely shattered. Mysaria, the White Worm, is standing right there, waiting in the dark to intercept them. It is a brilliant, silent confirmation that Alicent has absolutely zero political power left and literally nowhere left to run.
I want to linger on this brilliant, suffocating final sequence because it gives cinematic weight to their entire character arc. Driven to the absolute edge of terror, Rhaenyra and Alicent discover a secret, hidden door built deep inside the thick stone walls of their own royal chambers. They quickly light a small lantern and step frantically into the passageway. But then, pay attention to the sensory details. The heavy stone doors slam shut behind them with a final echoing thud. They cannot go back. In the tense silence, a stray cat suddenly drops from the shadows, jarring them. In the panic, the lantern drops to the stone floor. It shatters. The small flame dies, and the heavy darkness instantly creeps in and swallows them whole. They are literally and profoundly metaphorically left completely blind and lost in the winding, subterranean tunnels beneath the Red Keep. They have no light, no safe way forward, and ruthless enemies closing in on all sides. It is a perfectly executed, nightmare-inducing claustrophobia that symbolizes their complete loss of agency.
So, the crucial point we must walk away with as we wrap up this deep dive into the absolute bleakness of this world is this deeply provocative question. Let's tie all these threads together. In a catastrophic war defined by the melting heat of dragonfire, ancient blood rituals feeding thirsty trees, and the endless blinding hubris of men seeking glory, does the massive, ancient world itself even care? Does the earth shed a tear if Criston Cole and his exhausted men get hacked down in the mud on a futile, delusional march? Do the old silent gods in the trees care about the small council's petty bickering, Aegon's pathetic fall from Golden King to limping beggar, or the tragic, suffocating entrapment of the royal women in the dark? As the creeping darkness slowly closes in on every single one of these deeply flawed characters, it leaves us sitting with a massive, terrifying sense of cosmic indifference. It makes us wonder exactly what grand ancient forces are truly in control of Westeros, while these fading monarchs play their petty, doomed games of thrones.